Hello, it's so wonderful to have you joining me today for this masterclass on playing the harp and getting to know a little bit about what you can look forward to studying if you were to come and study harp with us at Canon Music Camp. And I look forward to hopefully getting to meet you in person someday. But in the meantime, I am really happy to get to share with you some of my experience and ideas that really will help you be able to be your best self as a musician and to really help you prepare for whatever it is you may have coming up, whether it's an audition or a recital or just wanting to learn music for the joy of working through some wonderful repertoire. Canon Music Camp is a wonderful camp that is happening every summer in the Appalachian Mountains near Boone, North Carolina. And it gives people the chance to see what it's like to be a music major for a day. So if you're making that decision and you are wondering what it might be like to study the harp or other instruments full time and make that be your profession, this is a wonderful place to get to come try it out. There's orchestra program and choir program, as well as there also being wonderful classes in music theory and history, all of those great things that give you a little bit of a peek into the life of what it is to be a music major and then a music professional. So today's masterclass is going to be about the harp and the things that you can do to be a better harpist. And I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Amber Joy Coffin, and I am the instructor of harp at ASU and the Canon Music Camp. And I have been playing harp for a very long time. I've been a lifelong lover of this beautiful instrument. And I grew up in North Carolina. I'm a North Carolina native, and I got my undergrad at UNC Charlotte. And then I moved up to Michigan for a few years and got my master's up there at the University of Michigan and got to meet some really wonderful fellow harpists and, of course, great professors there as well. And in addition to playing the harp, I also am a singer and I teach voice and I also play piano and teach piano as well. So I love all kinds of instruments. Music is a lovely thing to be able to do with your life. And I hope that you also would agree with that. Anyway, I have also been able to have the wonderful opportunity to perform around the world as well as here in the United States. And being able to take your music and share it with people all across the world is a really wonderful experience and something that I really hope to help my students be able to do too. There's wonderful opportunities that can help you get to see many amazing countries and other beautiful places through taking your music and being able to share it in lots of wonderful festivals and other kinds of internships where you can take your music and get to travel with it. So those are some of the highlights. I have really enjoyed getting to go to New Zealand. That was my most recent place that I traveled abroad. And it was an amazing country, absolutely gorgeous. Their cultures are beautiful. Their music is lovely. And of course, their scenery is just breathtaking. So, yeah, something to put in your bucket list, shall we say. But today we're going to be having a little bit of a masterclass. And if you aren't familiar with what that term is, a masterclass usually refers to a bunch of students gathering together to be able to share their music with each other in the presence of a teacher who's able to give them all feedback and all advice. Everyone learns from each other. And they will all come and talk with somebody who has mastered the craft of being able to do whatever that skill is. You might have a master class in cooking or in painting. In this case, it's on harp. And I wish we could all be together today, but we will get to do that this coming summer at Canon. So we can look forward to doing that. But today, I'd like to share with you a couple important things about your own preparation as a harpist. So we have 3 goals of things I'd like to cover today. One, we're going to build an efficient and productive practice routine. And I feel like sometimes, depending on your experience and your background of what you've had as education up to this point, sometimes people find that they are told, go home and practice. and they sit down with every good intention of having a great practice session, but are not 100% sure how they should go about that practicing to be really efficient and to really help themselves make it to the next step. So I think it's really important to encourage my students that not only should they be able to prepare music for their lesson or for whatever concerts they are preparing for, but it's so important that the teacher ends up giving you tools that you can go home and do all that really great work, and you feel empowered to have really effective, wonderful practice that is encouraging, because sometimes we struggle through challenging passages and we want our practice to be something that is rewarding for us rather than just a challenge. And one thing that I think is really, really important to stress is that we warm up our hands before we dive into a big practice session. And then we also stretch in the middle of a practice session, before, after, and then of course when we are away from the harp, because we need to think about our bodies as athletes, because we are doing so much physical work on this instrument, and we need to be able to treat our bodies really well since they have to work so hard for us. And then also at the end of this, we're going to talk a little bit about some tips to prepare for an audition. You may have an audition coming up soon. Perhaps you're auditioning for different music programs, and these will help you be in your best shape to be able to really succeed and get wonderful opportunities. So let's talk about an ideal practice scenario. And this is what I like to use for myself when I'm practicing, and I really encourage my students to do this as well. When we begin practicing, it's very important. Like I said, we are athletes. You would not expect an athlete to just run out onto the field and run a whole race without stretching, right? It's the first thing you usually see your runner do, is do some calf stretches, or, reach over their side and get some good stretches in. So we really do need to stretch and then warm up. We need to get the blood flowing in our fingers. We need to get our muscles moving so we can feel like we have dexterity. And then once that's all flowing really well, we can have a very productive practice session. We can get a lot done and it will feel good. We won't feel like we're fumbling around. We feel like we're ready to go. Then after you practice for a little while, and this length may depend on where you are in your journey as a harpist. Perhaps you are a beginner, and if so, your practice time may be a little bit shorter. You're not working on things that are quite as long. Maybe you haven't built up that endurance yet that comes with being a professional. So let's say maybe you practice for 15 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break and come back and practice for another 15. However, if you are much more advanced in your progress, that practice time might be 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then you go away and you take a more significant break, because you really need to give your body a chance to kind of shake it all out, get loose. Maybe you take a 15-minute break, and then you come back and you do another session of practice. When you are done, it's very important that you again stretch out your muscles so there's no residual tension being built up, and you are able to go out your day feeling happy. Maybe you even do another one of these practice sessions later in the evening before you head off to bed. So we advance here. Next slide. Let's talk about once we actually sit down to do the practice. We'll talk about that first, and then I'm going to give you some concrete stretches and warm-ups we can do after that. But when you are sitting down to practice, we want to be able to be productive and efficient, right? So productivity refers to the amount of things that we can accomplish, and efficiency refers to how quickly we can accomplish something with the least amount of effort, perhaps. So we want to be able to do great things with less effort, right? And then the one thing that you can always count on is that any piece, no matter how big it is, can be accomplished if you just break it down into a section that is small enough. If you can break it down into something that is a bite-sized piece for you, then you can take it in, your brain can digest it, and you will be able to really let it sink in, and it will stay with you so much better than if you had to practice the whole piece and you ran through the whole thing from beginning to end. You're not going to be able to digest all of that at once. We all know this, and we feel like we are wasting time by trying to play the piece beginning to end over and over again. It doesn't work. It really doesn't. So trust me, even though it may seem like you're making little tiny steps, those steps will stick with you and they will last. So small sections. And so really please remember that if that's the only thing you remember from today, small sections and stretching and warming up. And also, if you are a fan of two-set violin, you've probably heard this phrase a lot, but if you can play it slowly, you can play it fast. And this is so true because if you build those foundations at a really slow tempo where you are in control and you can really think about all the things you're trying to process and learn, and you can be very intentional about what you are playing, you will build very beautiful, smooth pathways and foundations in your brain as you're learning new material. And each time you play it, it will naturally get faster. So start out slow and start with small sections. Very important. I'd like for us to be able to take a look at what this looks like in practice. So I have an example piece here. This is Solfeggietto by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. And this is an excerpt from the piece. And you may have already played this piece, perhaps, or this may be brand new to you. But let's talk about what it would look like if we were to break this piece down into small sections. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pedals up here. And we have just finished some phrases from before, and we are going to be diving into a whole new phrase that starts in the left hand on this first line. So you can see where my cursor is right there. This is where we are going to start. I'm going to begin our phrase there. We're only going to do 2 measures at a time. We're going to start very slowly, and we are going to look at the fingerings that are being used, make sure we have the correct pitches and the correct rhythms. When I say slow, I mean slow. I'll show you what I mean. I'm thinking about my technique and how well my fingers are closing. I'm thinking about the patterns the notes are making and the shapes of what I'm placing on the strings. Okay, so we've just kind of identified some interesting things going on in these 2 measures, and we're going to stop. We're realizing that this pattern of placing a triad followed by a third that ends up replacing into a scale is something that happens often, right? So it's really great to identify patterns. And I like to use a technique called blocking. This is when instead of playing all the notes individually, you play clusters of notes that are these shapes and patterns that you're going to place. So if we were to do that, we would place a block there, then our third, and our replaced chord. Sounds crazy, right? Then we have our thumb, another chord, the third, the scale. Okay? And so it may be that some of these things are sinking in really easily for you, or it may be that, good gracious, you cannot remember what that note is that your thumb's supposed to play up here when you cross over into the treble clef. Oh, look at that. It's an A natural. Okay, I need to make a special point to remember that my next time through. So repetition is a really important thing to do. Small sections, repetition. However, don't ever repeat something just for the sake of repeating it. You want to repeat it with intention. I like to say repetition with intention, because you're always going to be thinking about something different that you're going to do this time to improve upon your last run through it, right? So this time we're going to work on being a little bit faster and trying to make sure we know exactly where that left hand's going. Right, feeling more confident. I realized I had a moment though of a slight shakiness in my hand because I was thinking about something else. So this time I'm going to work for clean, clean playing as I get a little bit faster. Right? So these are just ideas of ways you can be setting each repetition that there's something very specific that you are working on. Eventually, after you keep working through this, your end goal is to be able to play that section memorized before you move on to your next little nugget. And if you are struggling with evenness in your tone and your fingers, my favorite thing to recommend is practicing using different accents where you pick a certain finger to accent the whole time. For example, this might be the third finger. Right? You can hear how that works. Another thing you can do is practice messing with the rhythm, which works really well in a passage of running 16th notes like this. That will help you work on increasing your speed in short bursts. So we'll do something like 4 notes slow, followed by 4 notes very fast, going right into the next section. It would sound like this. Right? Something like that. And I know that might sound a little crazy. If you do that, then you swap hands, you do the next set fast. You're learning how to do quick bursts of speed. And after a while, the speed feels really pretty natural. And you might be able to play it really smoothly and evenly in a fast tempo. Right? So these are some ideas of things that you can try, but the things that will never change, of course, are the small sections and starting slow and paying a lot of attention to the details. One thing I didn't point out earlier, but you should really look at is making sure you know exactly what your dynamics are in every section you're working on. And you want to practice the dynamics from the beginning. From the very first time you practice that measure, you want to be playing it at the correct dynamic. I've had students before say, oh, I was saving the dynamics for later. I'm just working on getting the notes and rhythms right now. I promise you it'll be harder to relearn later that, oh, this section was supposed to be soft. And I've been practicing it loud this entire time. And now I have to retrain my brain to play that section soft. So you always want to be able to practice with the knowledge of what the dynamic is. You may choose as an unusual practice technique that's kind of getting outside of your box to mess around with that dynamics. That's totally fine. Get outside of a box and be creative as many times as you can, because that's where the fun in it is, really. And sometimes you might be having a strange struggle with something and you're like, you know, what would be really great is if I tried playing it soft instead of loud like it's written, then it might feel easier. Now that it feels easy, I can play it loud, right? So just be creative. There's all kinds of tips that you will start to pick up along the way. You may already have your absolute favorite go-to things that help you with your practicing. My favorites, those rhythms and accents, they really do wonders on very technical passages, and the metronome. The metronome is a wonderful friend, and you should definitely keep a metronome right by your stand at all times, because this is going to help you be a really solid and secure musician. It's going to help you play with a lot of accuracy and integrity. And that can be something that's challenging. And when you have an instrument that's as resonant as this harp, right? I mean, it's just ringing big chords, right? Those chords can sound mushy if you aren't super clean about your rhythm. Right? You can be really clean about it. And then if you're working with a conductor that's trying to keep everybody together, you are something that sounds like a rock and everyone else can lock into that. And that is what you want your conductor to say about you. So a metronome is very important. And then you'll see on this list, we also have the rhythm and accent drills. That's what we were just talking about before, where you might accent a particular finger or mess around with the rhythm, changing out slows and fasts to help you with your speed. Blocking is what we did where we had the sections and then we played the clusters, right? So you kind of work on building the shapes into your hand and then using your hands separately. Now, this is an interesting one. In the piece that we just worked on, solfeggiato, it doesn't make a lot of sense to learn just the right hand on its own and just the left hand because they're constantly feeding into each other and taking turns. However, you might have another piece that has got a lot of chords in it where the right hand has big chord passages and then the left hand has arpeggio and then followed by something else. That would be a really great time for you to work on the hands individually and then put them back together. So you can really make sure they're moving where they need to be on the strings and that you're building in the muscle memory of what each hand needs to be doing. And then studying the score. This is so important and is something that's often overlooked. But, we practice a lot when we're preparing for something. Blisters are a real thing, even if you're a professional and you suddenly have to hike up the number of hours that you're practicing because you're preparing for a really big deal, performance or an audition, you're going to get sore fingers and you need to give yourself a break. You also need to give your shoulders and your neck a break every now and then. So it's really great to do some time where you're studying just the score and listening to the music in your head and imagining it. And you can even look at the notes and sit there and try to feel in your fingers what it feels like to play it. All of this is so important and really valuable. And again, talking about athletes, gymnasts use this kind of mental practice where they visualize themselves going through a perfect flip or a perfect routine. And it helps build their confidence, but it also helps them be able to set their sight on exactly what they need to be able to do. So when they have to get out there and actually do it for real, their body already feels the inertia of what it will be when it's exactly right. Right. So this is an extremely valuable tool and it's extremely valuable for memorization, of course. So make sure you spend some time just studying your score. And if you're someone who's a student and you have to a long bus ride, ooh, what a great time to pull out your score and get a little extra practice in if you're finding it hard to find enough practice time in your day. Studying the score will really help you make advances. And then again, there's the phrase we talked about, repetition with intention. You've heard, I'm sure, the phrase practice makes perfect, and it does. But you have to think about what it is you're practicing. Let's say you're working on a difficult passage and you've played it 5 times now, and each time there was a different error. So you have practiced now 5 times of an error. And then you get it perfect on the 6th time. And you're like, great, I've learned it, I'm done. So you have practiced it 1 time perfectly and 5 times incorrectly. Which one do you think your brain's going to remember? Oh, clearly it's not going to remember the perfect time. So once you get something right, you need to play it multiple times to lock it in and ingrain it so that it stays with you. And you come back tomorrow and instead of sitting down at the instrument to play what you just worked on, you're like, oh man, I don't remember what I worked on yesterday. Or I remember what I worked on, but my fingers can't do it anymore because you didn't take the time to lock it in, right? So make sure you always do that extra repetition. All right. Coming back to this example piece, I just wanted to make sure we had talked about the different places where you could use those patterns, right? We talked about blocking on this first line, but really quickly, I want to talk about line 3 and 4. These are fabulous places to do some blocking, especially because the score kind of lays it out for you really nicely. And it feels like you can grab these with intention. You're not having to make weird combinations. You have the octave and this chord, and then this octave, and muffle with that chord. And then we have these broken up bits, right? But we're going to practice them like the chords they are. Right? So that's a great example of when blocking works out really nicely, right? And again, that would have been an entire 2-measure section. That's my small section for the day. Or maybe I have a longer practice session and I'm working on 3 small sections each time I sit down to practice, right? So, but that's the section I'm working on for now. And until it's good, I'm just sticking with those two measures. I promise this will pay off really well in the long run. Okay, so now let's get back to the first part of what happens before we ever begin practicing warm-ups and stretching. So you might ask, why is this important? Why is it going to tell me to warm up? I have this much time in my day. I just need to sit down and practice. I've done that, to be honest. I have had those times when I'm rushed, and then I regretted it later that I didn't take the time to stretch and warm up. We work really hard to remove all tension from our playing, but we are working, right? Our hands are at work. Our shoulder is at work holding up this instrument, right? Even though we might be working on having that perfect balance point, it's still holding up an instrument. Our feet are moving pedals. Our body is really being used, and there is tension that will build up. And repetitive use injuries are things like carpal tunnel or tendonitis. And musicians are one of the main categories of people that will get these injuries because they're constantly doing fine motor skills at a rapid rate very often and repetitively. People that are typing on a computer might get the same kind of issues as well. But we have to be very careful since we're studying music and this is going to be our livelihood. We want to make sure that we are protecting what we have here to be able to play the music. So I am also speaking from experience because as a young person, I did not take the time to stretch. I did not take the time to really warm up my hands. And I ended up getting some really uncomfortable tendonitis that I had to take a mandatory few weeks off of playing. I wasn't allowed to play at all, or I was going to injure myself permanently. And I learned from that some things that I made a major change in the way that I approached my technique. And now I am so focused on my body health when I am at the instrument and also having really wonderful sound that comes from having extra relaxation in the hands. And I would love to be able to share that with my students because I think it is so important to have that as your foundation. And we want to make sure that we aren't building up anything that's going to give us an injury. The other thing is that you might sit down to play a difficult piece. And if you don't have blood really flowing through your fingers and the muscles already warmed up, you're not going to feel very dexterous. You're going to feel like you're fumbling around for the first couple of minutes of that practice session. And that just builds a discouraged feeling, right? And like we said, we want to love what we're doing at the instrument. We might have challenges we have to face, but practice can be fun and it can be really rewarding. So we really want to be able to warm up our hands and our muscles so that they are ready to go. All right, those are the important reasons why we should be warming up. Now I'm going to share with you my go-to warm-up. This is my favorite warm-up, and I do this warm-up every single time I sit down to practice. And here's why. I like to be able to relax so that everything that I'm playing feels nice and calm, but I'm really listening to kind of tie in my ear so that I am being a very active listener to my playing. I'm focusing on the tone I'm making sure my hand is loose, but making great tone. And then I'm also thinking about the mechanics of my technique. Like how well are my fingers closing? How well is my hand coming away from the strings? It's kind of a time to touch base with all of those things on a very easy and familiar warm-up, right? Instead of on a difficult piece that we are working on. And we go slow. At least we start that way. And as you'll see, this warm-up starts to pick up speed. So let's just advance for a second so we can see what happens. This is basically a warm-up that starts with a C arpeggio. It moves up to a D, back up to an E again. Then we go down to the D. And when we descend and we go to C, instead of being eighth notes, we move into triplets. So it naturally works on speeding up a little bit. So you get more of that dexterity going. Again, it's the same pattern, but now at a triplet level. Triplet C arpeggio, triplet D arpeggio, triplet E, back down to C. When we return to C, we move on to page 3, which is 16th notes, right? So it naturally speeds up. We don't have to start going much faster. We can start really slow. Oh, here, actually, I think I went forward a slide. Let me go back. You can see what we're playing here. All right. So I'll show you a little bit of how I use this arpeggio. We use sets of 4 fingers in each hand. So you want to warm up every finger. We're going really nicely and slowly. Yes, that is how slow I play it first. I'm focusing on my tone. Instant relaxation after every pluck. And then just ease of placing, right? And with every note we're playing, we're trying to see if we can help it feel a little bit easier, a little bit more comfortable today. Now we switch to the D, so it's a fluid transition, right? I'm going to speed it up a little bit for the sake of this demonstration, so you're not listening to me forever. Play these arpeggios. We move to E. And back down to D. And C. But now we would move on to doing triplets. So I'm just going to demonstrate the triplets with the C arpeggio so you can see that. If you'd like to do this yourself, you're welcome to contact me to get this sheet music or just use it yourself, right? If you know what it is, it's just C, D, E, D, C. You keep going from 8 triplet 16th. It's pretty, memorizable. That's a word. Anyway, here we go. So this is our triplets. Okay, and then we have the 16ths. So it speeds up a good bit at the end. But hopefully that gives you something that would be a really nice warm up. I use this and by the end of it, I feel like I'm ready to go. Some people prefer to use scales. I like the arpeggios because it helps me feel like I get my hands spread out a little bit more and I'm using the harp really well. I also have really large hands, so I like things that really help me feel like I can sink into my instrument with like a nice big spacing. So this is my favorite warm up. And let's move on over here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about stretching. I realized there wasn't really a great image to be able to put up there to show you these stretches, but I'm going to demonstrate them and you can do them along with me. First, we want to make sure that we are stretching our hands and our wrists, right? These are what's really going to be doing most of the work. So the big part of our muscle in the palm is where a lot of our closing comes from. So you can take turns just doing small circles on your thumb and on your palm as you kind of work around. So just make sure there's no tension in there. Maybe you were trying really hard to open something tight earlier, like a jar, and it got really tight. Just anything. Then you'll move to the other hand, right? But really get the blood flowing. This is every time we do massage, we are encouraging blood flow to head to the areas that we are massaging. We're going to do that. And then we'll move it onto our fingertips. And I like to interlace. This gives a gentle stretch to the palms of my hand. And then if you can put your hands in a prayer position and just gradually drop them until they're level. This helps stretch the bottoms of your wrists right here. And then it depends on how flexible you are and how comfortable you are with this, but without hurting yourself, you can actually bend a good bit. I like to bend my fingers back a little bit. This kind of stretches out this part, which is going to spend so much time closing and going the other direction during your practice session. It's nice to give it a counterbalance. And then you can gently kind of manipulate your hand to stretch out the wrist over the top. This. One more of those. And then roll your wrists. This is a really, really good one. Okay, now that our hands are feeling nice and loose, we want to bring our shoulders up to our ears and drop them and do a couple shoulder rolls going back. Right. And then reverse it and bring them forward. And you want to roll your neck. Now don't overextend your chin up when you go back. So you can take your chin down, roll your head, and then keep it almost vertical, just ever so slightly back. But this will help you not overextend your neck into a direction that might actually hurt more than feel good. Do a couple neck rolls. Might want to turn and look to the side. And look to the other side. If you're really tight, you may even want to take your hand and gently help your head drop a little more. There we go. Feels good. And then my shoulders gather tension, so I tend to just give them a little bit of a massage in the back like this. Maybe work up my neck a little bit. And we have these amazing little muscles at the base of our skull that attach right from where you can feel the bottom of your skull back there. It kind of attaches back to the softer part of your neck. Those muscles are called occipital muscles. And there's about 6 or 8 of them. And if you press gently back there and kind of massage them, they carry all kinds of tension because they're holding your heavy head on top of your neck. You wouldn't believe how hard they're working. You might not even have known they were there. And if you can give them a little massage, it'll help with any neck and shoulder tension. And then you're also going to be sitting on your stool a lot. So it's important to be able to really stretch your back and maybe even your legs. If you're really flexible, you may want to be able to sit down on a mat and do some, like I call them pizza pie stretches because it looks like you're making a big slice of pizza. But you put your legs out in front of you, spread them, lean over one leg over the other. I don't have that set up with me here now, but do something that helps you feel nice and limber in your legs. And then I always like to practice doing one of those stretches where I stand up and I will stretch and I will bend completely over to stretch my back and touch my toes, and then come back up to a standing position before I sit down to play. So I get blood flowing through my whole body and I feel actually so much more loose and energized. I'm ready to go. So I hope you are feeling nice and loose after doing that too. And it only took a few minutes, right? So it's a great thing to do to help you feel really locked in with your instrument. You're prepared, your mindset is ready to go, and you can be really successful in your practice session. Which brings us to our final point, right? If you've had a really successful practice session, excellent, because you're probably preparing for something really important. And even if all you're doing is learning a piece for the joy of learning it, that's still really important because it matters to you and you're taking the time in your life to study this instrument, right? So it's important. But if you're preparing for an audition, yes, there's a lot of pressure and there can be a lot of stress. So let's talk about a couple things that you should just really hone in on. Often, unless you are auditioning for a panel that has a harpist on it, you will be auditioning for different members of a music faculty, often a pianist, maybe a cellist or a guitarist, other people that have a really wonderful musical sense and have something about their instrument that might be a little bit similar to the harp, right? But there's not a whole lot of familiarity. Often when you're auditioning for just, let's say, a summer music program, the harp teacher might listen to the harp teacher will definitely listen to your audition, but they won't be the only one, right? There will also be a panel of other people listening to it. And so they're not going to be looking at your technique. They're not going to be looking at, did she close her fingers just right? Because they may not be familiar with that because that's not a technique that is pertinent to their instrument. But they will be looking for all those important musical details like your dynamics, your tempo, and your articulation. And they're going to be looking to see if there's any words in foreign languages that would tell you something about how you should be expressing that piece of music that hopefully you looked up and you know exactly what every single word on your piece of paper of your sheet music means, right? That's very important. So as you're preparing for this audition, realize you're playing most often for non-harpists, and these are the things that they are listening for. If you have the correct dynamics, you're playing it at the correct tempo, if you're maintaining a steady tempo, if you have staccato articulation where there should be staccato, or if you have the right accents, etc. Also, people are sitting on an audition panel for a long time. And when someone comes up and they put their whole heart and soul into the piece they're playing and every ounce of musical energy they have, it stands out. It really makes a difference. So you should always be musical. Never, ever, ever sacrifice your musicality to be perfect, right? Because oftentimes, as a student at your age, you are probably working to be able to get into another educational program. You may be an older student and you are actually looking to audition for your first job. That's a slightly different kind of audition process than auditioning for an education program, right? If you're looking to audition for your first job, or maybe it's your second job, you need to be able to show that you can cut it, that you can do exactly what needs to be done. It can be perfect. So, yeah, there's even more intensity that needs to be given to all those details. But even then, the musicality is so important. And when you are a student and you're auditioning for a college or a summer music program, when an educator like myself or someone else listening on that panel hears a student that brings all of their passion and their love for their instrument into their playing, the first thing we think is, we want to work with that student. We want to spend time with them because they love music. I can tell they love it just as much as I do. And we're going to have a blast. And I might be able to help them learn a couple things, some detail work that's going to help them be even better musician. But they've got the heart and soul for it. And this is going to be a great fit. So think of that impression that you're leaving with your audition, right? And beyond just the impression you're leaving, in the end, sometimes auditions don't go the way you think you will. You might be as prepared as you have ever been, and you didn't get the position. You didn't get in, you didn't get the job, right? Because maybe someone else came in and just they were listening for their sound and they heard them in a different way and it just spoke to them, right? So you can't put too much pressure on yourself to have that audition validate you and validate your experience as a musician. What you need to do is go in there and love what you're doing. And if you're musical, you're going to love it for the sake of yourself enjoying what you do, right? And that's the most important thing, is to really enjoy what you do. So bring that into every performance and every audition. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the elephant in the room, right? Everyone's got nerves. They've got pressure and they're feeling like, oh my gosh, and this is, we all deal with it, right? The thing that helps is the more times you have performed, especially the more times you have performed that piece or pieces. So the most important thing you can do for yourself is to schedule practice performances prior to a really big audition or recital, right? So for example, when I was preparing to have my senior recital when I was graduating from high school, I went and performed all my pieces for my friends one day after we'd gotten together. Then I went over and I played it for my parents and my grandmother, right? People that care about you and are there to support you. And it gives you a chance to play through all the pieces and get any of the jitters out. So schedule a couple of those. Maybe go and play at assisted living center for some people that would really love to have some music brought into their life, right? And it feels a little bit more formal and it helps you really get into the mindset of, okay, this is the big deal. And still it's practice, right? And it helps you feel really prepared, because the more prepared you are, the more fun you're going to have. Not being prepared equals some nerves. Yeah. Because you walk up there, you're like, oh my gosh, what about this? What about that? I don't know if I practiced it enough, right? Negative self-talk. We have to work when we're practicing to plan the things we say to ourselves about, all right, this is the section where I'm going to play it really beautiful and sparkly. And then I'm going to remember that C chord. And you plan positive self-talk when you're playing through your piece, because otherwise those little voices are going to try to come in and throw you off course. Don't listen to them, right? But the more you've prepared and the better you feel about your piece, the more fun you're going to have, and therefore the better your audition is going to be. So think about that as you're preparing for the next thing that you have on your plate, that have fun, Spend enough time with your music that you feel confident in it, and always put your whole heart and soul and all of your passion into everything that you play. It makes a world of difference. It really does. So I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me and enjoying getting to talk about the harp and some things we can do to be really successful in our practice time. And I would love to hear from you if you would be interested in studying the harp at the Canon Music School or at Appalachian State University. I teach there, and I would really love to be able to work with you or answer any questions you might have. I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your day, and keep practicing and loving your music. Thanks so much.